Pizza Jaffa's orange grows. Microchips is us. iPhone cameras us. Taco salads us. Vamos us. Olive Garden us. White phosphor us. Sabra Hamas. Hezbollah us.
See ya! And welcome to Bad Hezbollah.
A vlog leg mora litab podcast ya. That was bad Hungarian.
Bad Hungarian is the new name of this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. My name is Matt Lieb. I am your world's most moral co-host.
And I am Mate Daniel.
Yeah,
the other
right.
most moral, most Magyar co-host.
Most Magyar co-host Mate. So excited for all of you to join us for this very special episode of Bad Hezbollah, in which we just actually completed an interview with Stephen Kapos, who is a Holocaust survivor, and
Caposh.
Caposh. Sorry, I didn't put the right emphasis on the correct syllable. Caposh, who is a Holocaust survivor and pro-Palestine activist in London.
What? You can be both?
You can be both. In fact, it makes more sense to be both. In fact, it actually is the correct position.
I thought that at the very end of the Holocaust,
as a gift, as penance.
I thought that at the very last moment, before the Red Army liberated the camps,
that's right,
everyone gathered together, and the storyteller said, and the moral of the story is,
move
never again for us.
That's right. And
now let's all move to the place that none of us
have ever been
or want to be.
nor has a climate that we very much enjoy. The moral of the story of the Holocaust and of World War II is doing this is okay if we're doing it.
Yep.
And somehow Stephen did not learn that moral. And so he has been speaking out for the rights of Palestinians and against genocide for the last couple of years. And it was a great interview, and you will see it soon. But we usually actually let our guests wait in the waiting room of StreamYard while we talk and stuff. And this is one of the few times where we're like,
He's suffered enough.
I don't want him to see us like that. As far as he knows, we're two very serious guys. And then he quickly found out in the interview we are not two very serious guys.
Turns out he's got a great sense of humor too.
He's great. He's hilarious and incredibly insightful. And I think you'll enjoy the interview and definitely get a lot out of it. I know I did. But just to preempt that, how great this interview is, give it preemptively 5 stars in a review on all of the podcast apps. You
already know intuitively how good it is.
You know it's good. When have we ever let you down? We're one of the best things you've ever seen. So give us 5 stars in a review. Give us a subscribe. Hit that bell. There's a bell, I think. YouTube.com/@BadHasbara.
Next stop, 50,000 subscribers.
That's right. And then after that, we're done. We don't want any more subscribers after 50. Also, patreon.com/BadHasbara. You will get all the episodes right as they're finished, being edited. You'll get it before everyone else. And you get a bonus episode every week. So that's pretty sick.
Do you know we just hit our 2,000th paying subscriber to Patreon?
I know. I saw. And
today, it was literally at 2000.
Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for everyone who is supporting us on on Patreon. It makes this podcast possible, frankly, because without being able to at least support paying rent, it's hard to justify to my family me just starting more and more podcasts. So I appreciate it. But please don't give us your hard-earned money until you have checked out GazaFunds.com. Today's episode brought to you by GazaFunds.com. GazaFunds.com is a rotating carousel of crowdfunding campaigns from individuals and families in Gaza raising money for rebuilding, resettlement, medical, and other personal expenses. If you want to donate directly to people affected by Israel's, quote, war on Gaza, this is a wonderful resource. GazaFunds.com. Please donate to them before you even think about joining the Patreon, because once again, they need it more than we do. Daniel,
Yes, sir.
What's the spin?
Well, if I was a good Hungarian, I would have picked some Bartok, some Kodai off my classical music shelf.
I was going to say,
but I didn't. These are birthdays. Last few days have been seen a glut of musician birthdays, starting with Bob Dylan on the 25th, which is also my Uncle Janosch's birthday. If he's listening, happy
birthday, Janosch,
to my Uncle Janosch.
Hell yeah.
But I've already featured Bob Dylan so many times on What's the Spin.
A lot. Yeah.
And Bob Dylan I thought I would look for. I said, well, who else has been born in the last few days? So number one, we got the great Andre 3000, just turned 50.
Oh my God. He's 50?
He's 50 years old. A couple of months older than me. From the Mighty Outcasts. So that was the album ATLiens.
Oh.
Lauryn Hill had a birthday.
Oh, beautiful. Well, how old is she now? In her 50s.
I think she's a bit older than him, maybe like 54, possibly.
Man, that's
but
crazy.
I might be wrong. Anyway, this is Fuji's The Score.
Yeah.
An album that hasn't aged as well as I would have liked. But anyway.
Oh, really? What's wrong with it?
It's got some good singles. There's a lot of really bad skits. Like skits were big in 90s hip hop, and some groups did them well, and some didn't. Like there's an incredibly racist Chinese restaurant skit that's just entirely silly. Anyway, Heavy D would have been having a birthday the last couple of days. R.I.P. to the Hevster.
That's right.
Patti LaBelle had a birthday in the last few days.
Cool.
So here's the classic Nightbirds by her group LaBelle.
Mm-hmm.
Hank Williams was born a couple of days ago, many years ago.
Wow.
The great Hank Williams.
Greatest hits.
A couple more. I'm just destroying my records as I throw them onto the bed.
You have too many of them anyways.
That's true. Levon Helm of the band had a birthday.
Okay.
The only American member of this group from Arkansas.
Rock of Ages?
This is their live album.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not the musical?
No, it's not.
Okay.
And then finally, Stevie Nicks just had a birthday.
Oh,
and this is her album with Lindsey Buckingham before they joined Fleetwood Mac.
Right. Yeah.
Look at that young ingenue.
Look at those two beautiful people. They're going to be together forever.
No drama ahead for those two.
No, they're going to do all right. I can always tell at first glance if a couple's going to make it. And this Buckingham and Nicks characters, I feel like they're in love.
They can't go their own way.
No, yeah. Always going back to you. Love it. So that's what is spinning. Those are all great records. Also,
add them to the playlist now. Whoever you are out there, that's managing the Spotify playlist.
Well,
I can't wait to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, there has been word from some of the people who subscribe to the playlist or whatever it is, the ones who use the playlist on Spotify, who agree with you, Daniel. Please remove the comedy albums from the playlist. There has been multiple comments like, no, seriously, it's ruining the playlist. And
I agree.
I feel like, it's probably the right thing to do. Yeah. There's probably also a version of the playlist that exists where you pick one or two really great songs from each album. Yeah. That's also, but I mean, I'm not telling you how to do your job, guy who randomly decided to do us a favor of making the playlist on Spotify. You're doing great, but should you feel like it,
a little more curated experience?
Yeah. Either way, but thank you for doing what you're doing. Okay. Without further ado, it is time for us to present to you this wonderful interview that we did with Stephen Kapos.
I'd say Caposh.
Capo. I feel like I'm doing it exactly the way you're doing it. This
you're
is like
saying Caposh.
Okay.
And I'm saying Caposh.
Caposh. Okay. I just, this is like
but it's like mate versus mate.
Right, or nuclear versus nuclear, you
Right.
know? Nuclear
Yeah, the only
is
difference being
fine.
one is correct and
No.
one makes you sound like a yokel.
I'm not a yokel. I just don't understand why there can't be more U's in nuclear. So please, everyone, enjoy this great interview that we did with the wonderful Stephen Kapos. We have a wonderful guest today, an interview that I'm very excited to do because this has been someone who we've wanted to speak to for a very long time. Someone who we've seen only in various viral clips on the internet and in various other interviews. And being a real journalism podcast that we've accidentally somehow become, we are also going to be interviewing this person. He is a Holocaust survivor, a pro-Palestine activist, and he is joining us right now. Ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, welcome to the podcast, Stephen Kaposh. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for
Hi,
having me.
Stephen.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast. We really appreciate it. It's very cool.
Hi, thank you. Yeah.
I would like to begin by asking you about the various viral videos that I've seen that have come out with you at different protests, different Palestine solidarity demonstrations. You seem to be part of a small but yet, very vocal contingent of Holocaust survivors who are speaking out against the genocide in Palestine.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what it's like and what it's been like for the past 18 months being a public figure now talking about this?
Yes, this is a somewhat surreal experience for me because it all happened rather quickly. I have not been used to public speaking very much. Yes, this group that you are mentioning, the full name is Holocaust Survivors and Descendants against the genocide in Gaza. That's a full title. It's quite a long title, but
It's catchy.
It's self-explanatory. I haven't started this group. I first saw it. I don't know if you know Mark Atkin, colleague and organizers of this group, who started it with Chaim Brashith, who you may have heard of him. And on one of these demonstrations, I just seen them standing on the side, 2 or 3 of them. And at that time, they were just descendants. They didn't have an actual survivor. And I thought, well, that's such a good idea that I would join. And I did. And ever since then, we were at every single large demo. And it has been growing. Now it's nearly 20, 30 members. And almost my entire family has joined as descendants. And it has various purposes, but it's a reaction in the first place to the lie that all Jews support Israel.
Right.
And secondly, the lie that these pro-Palestine marches are somehow no-go areas for Jews.
Yes.
And we stand there and clearly declare that we are Jews. And we have the warmest possible reception, actually. So people sort of, hug us and thank us and get very emotional about it. I really appreciate it.
And this is in England, right?
Yeah, in London, mostly.
In London.
I want to ask you about that reception because, there are Jewish groups like the visibly religious, ultra-Orthodox Neturei Karta, Satmar, Jews who will show up to pro-Palestine rallies. And I've seen, obviously I don't know what the counter-protest scene is like at London protests. Here in New York, if you go to a pro-Palestine rally, you're likely to have, these fervent Zionists in small numbers showing up to try and confront people. And they get in the face of these Jews and scream at them and say, how can you betray your people? And have you had encounters with counter protesters who would have the, let's say, the chutzpah or the temerity to come up to a group of Holocaust survivors and or descendants of same, and with the same kind of hostile energy? What have you received from those quarters?
The London Metropolitan Police has a policy to keep the groups apart. And usually it's organized well beforehand and there are allocated areas. So we haven't had, I mean, they are, as you say, extremely volatile and aggressive at various times. But on these particular large demos, the police makes it absolutely sure that we don't mix. And I will tell you about a local event when such a mix did occur with consequences. But generally speaking, we have not had this confrontation unless there is a rather one-off provocation.
Right.
There was one such thing, that there is a Israel-supported Zionist organization sort of campaign against anti-Semitism, CAA.
Right.
And its chief executive, Gideon Falter, has been on one of these past occasions pretended to be casually happened to be at the place as the demonstration was going on, and he wanted to assert his right, as he said it, to occupy the same space as the huge demo, which was large groups marching past, and he wanted to cross the road with against the flow of the march. And
yes, I've seen this video. I've seen this where he's and then he's asserting that he is not being allowed his freedom of movement due to the fact that he's Jewish, right?
Yeah, by chance, this happened to be right next to where we were standing, so I actually saw it unfold almost. And he pretended that this was a casual thing, that he just wanted to happen to be that. And later videos showed it up that he had a crew with him, and they were cameras and so on, videoing, and the whole thing was a provocation, and it became an own goal actually, because
it's like someone complaining that your face got in the way of my fist,
right? Yeah, sure.
The only other sort of confrontation I had was a recent one, when somebody came up to us, and it's very unusual, but he did, and said, shame on you, the usual stuff. And talking to me. And I said to him, are you a Zionist? And he said, yes, of course. And the next question was, do you support the genocide? And he said, what genocide? Right. So I said, the discussion terminated.
Yeah.
Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to have any exchange with somebody who's still, having seen what we are all seeing,
right,
cannot accept that there is something awful like a genocide is going on. So, I just want to add that our group's policy is not to engage with the Zionists.
It's a good policy.
On the very few occasions when they try to, but
that's our podcast policy too. Is we do not engage with Zionists,
except when we're on Twitter, when that's all we do.
Right. Well, that's
I mean, we that's us having fun, this podcast could use a little party discipline reminiscent of what you guys are doing anymore.
Well, we might want to consider engaging less. But I want to ask
that's performance art when we do it.
Yes. Yeah. I want to ask in terms of your experience being a Holocaust survivor and hearing someone, a Zionist at a, march saying what genocide. I imagine for you this it's you might even find it more offensive than, just your average person being a survivor of a genocide in which people to this day, there are still Holocaust deniers. What are your thoughts on the way in which people are doing denialism, and do you see a connection there between what the denialism of the European population during the Holocaust and the denialism of the Israeli population and the Jewish institutional population in denying this genocide?
Yes, well, first of all, I found it extremely offensive the way that the genocide is being used as a cover for the Holocaust, or rather the other way around, the Holocaust used as a cover for the ongoing genocide in various ways. But I think that the Holocaust experience is deliberately kept alive and exploited, and it feeds the Israeli exceptionalism and that propagation of Jewish exceptionalism,
right?
And the lack of accountability that flows from it. And with that kind of bolstering them in all their actions, they then turn to the Palestinians and make them pay for the Holocaust, in effect, by whatever their purpose, which is basically ethnic cleansing, and it has always been from the beginning, is being covered by the Holocaust experience, because they cannot be accountable. The lack of accountability that flows from it, in their view, in their mind. And
it's using it to justify this genocide, the experience of the Holocaust, the historical experience of, all of historical anti-Semitism, plus very specifically the Holocaust, is being used to justify
or to obviate it, to say, well, we know from genocide, that's they'll use any approach. They can say it's justified, or they can say you're misusing that word. Because we know what a genocide is, because it happened to us. And a genocide is when millions of people are industrially exterminated in high technology camps with gas chambers. That's what a genocide is.
Yeah, well, of course, it's absolute rubbish, because that argument, because actually, as Francesca Albanese points it out in her interviews, in order to be genocide, it doesn't need a single death. There are various 5 definitions of various actions of obliteration, cultural as well as physical. And any one of the 5 would justify a genocide in any case. But this is often misinterpreted, and the numbers game is used. Particularly, for example, even the British Foreign Secretary, until very recently, I think even now, although he's altered his rhetoric in the last few days, in great panic.
But is that Lemmy?
Lemmy, yes.
Yeah.
He was saying in Parliament that it's not genocide. Genocide assumes millions and something. Francesca Albanese reacted to that. Lemmy, is he a lawyer? I mean, he just doesn't know his law. Quite simply.
Yeah.
And of course, there in other forms. I was absolutely disgusted when I saw the Israeli representative to the UN, when it was his turn to say something, very theatrically putting on a yellow star. And I was just sickening, because it is exploiting something which was a total humiliation for the Jewish people, who had to wear a yellow star. I had to wear one, even at
Right.
7-year-old.
My God.
And I just don't want to that to be played in a theatrical fashion for a purpose.
Well, so
particularly
let's go back to what happened to you, if that's okay in this point in the interview, Matt.
Sure.
To transition to that, because as exploited and weaponized as the Holocaust has been cynically by Zionists and Israel supporters, this is something very real and very massive and very unthinkably cruel that
Yeah.
happened, and that you, like my father, were, in fact, you were in the same city in Budapest.
Yes.
But you were a bit older than my dad was, so you have memory of it. So what can you tell us about what you remember of that time and what happened to your family?
Well, I do remember it in like a set of postcards, almost, not as a video. Sort of in isolated.
Very dark postcards. I would want to be sent one.
Yeah. But I want to say that because I was only 7 years old, I didn't have fear. In retrospect, I should have had, but I didn't.
Sure.
Because I didn't fully understand the implications of things. It was more a reflected fear, because I noticed the intense fear and distress of the adults around me. But I myself was not, in various difficult situations, still wasn't afraid. And and it was the experience was a combination of things, because on the one hand, it was I suppose humiliation and discrimination, ending up in hiding on false papers in protected, inverted commas, protected homes, because they were protected by bluffs, with the help of the Swiss Cross envoy to Budapest, who pretended certain buildings to have had international extraterritorial protection, which is total bluff. But it was
that was a pretense.
Yes.
So the glass factory that hid my grandmother and father was, as I understand the story, a Swiss protected zone. That itself was a front.
I don't know about that specific particular place, but the one that I had experience of, it was a project which was started by the Lutheran Christian church in Hungary, which there were two Protestant churches, the Lutherans and the Calvinists, and they both churches combined on their bishop's instructions to initially to create protected homes to protect initially the converted Christian ex-Jewish children, and that later grew into accepting almost anybody,
Right.
But it started with 1 or 2 homes and grew into an archipelago of large number of homes. And the organization was called the Good Shepherd Organization, supported by these 2 Protestant churches, plus the Swiss Red Cross, who had a very brave envoy, von Born, who has been later recognized as a, I don't know what the correct term is, as a just Gentile or something.
Righteous among the Gentiles.
Righteous.
Righteous.
Gentile with a tree in Yad Vashem.
On top of a Palestinian grave site or raised village. I mean, Yad Vashem literally is.
The person is righteous. No one said the tree also had to be righteous. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
The tree itself.
He didn't design the award or the plaque.
Yeah.
They just gave it to him.
But the key person was a Swiss envoy, who was a very brave man, and given to this bluffing, because he had absolutely no agreements or paperwork to prove that any particular of these homes, and they were growing in number, in fact had international Swiss protection. They stuck the Swiss flag on it. And when the Hungarian fascist groups questioned it, and they tried to raid such places, which happened several times,
right.
A quick phone call would call in von Born, who would say, well, don't you dare put a foot across that threshold, because that's Switzerland, and there will be an international incident. And it was a complete bluff. He had a collaborator in the Hungarian foreign office who could be phoned to confirm this to the fascist groups, and said, yes, if you please don't do that, because if you go over, it will be an international incident. And generally, they just went away after a while.
Wow.
Really playing into the stereotype of the bumbling Nazis,
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Okay, if you say so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to get in trouble.
Yes.
So in the the Lutheran Church, or this part of this project was doing this converting people into Christianity, right? I imagine that this only lasted for so long as a way of protecting the Jewish
Absolutely,
population.
it's very short time. There were a series of legislations passed, and at that time, and it was literally just a matter of weeks before this was no longer a protection.
Right.
And so this is when our family converted for getting a degree of protection for a short time.
Right.
Well, you didn't know if it would be a short time or what. And I distinctly remember, it's one of the clearest memories, that what on the day when the conversion occurred, and because my father and uncle came out of the ceremony and had a laughing fit, because it was
that's how you know that the conversion worked. As soon as you come out, you're just filled with joy, laughing at.
Yes. But I must add that on some members of my family took it absolutely seriously, because it went with a degree of study period, led by Christian pastors. And there is a branch of my family whose conversion really was genuine. A particular aunt who ended up living in Haifa and was still Calvinist Christian, but kept it quiet from the neighbors because it wasn't a thing for a patriotic
Israeli
Jew to be Israeli. But she was an extremist Zionist at the same time.
Well, those two things are not in contradiction.
They seem to happen a lot. So at this point, how long did you stay under this protection before, whatever Nuremberg laws or whatnot were passed, saying that anyone who had Jewish blood had to...
But chronologically, first, were briefly under the protection of the Kastner project. And when it was decided that it might not work, and we left it, it is then that I was taken into one of these protected places. The first one, actually, that was so creative.
Wow.
That was in October 44. And I have a very clear memory again of that day, because I was taken up I was still small enough to be carried in arms, and I was carried up to the hills of Buda, where this home was, going past a German checkpoint. Now, Hungary was Germany's ally formerly, but by that time, the Hungarian dictator, Admiral Horthy, was wobbling in his alliance to Hitler, because he realized that the war was lost by then, well and truly lost.
Right.
And he was making an ineffective broadcast of declaring Hungary's departure from the alliance and virtually changing sides. And whereupon the German army surrounded the castle, which was his home. And it was on that day that I was taken up into these homes. And we had to go past a German unit which had its field gun trained on the castle.
Wow.
And the person who was taking me had some magic piece of paper. And I fantasized that it was something that he acquired in an earlier visit to Germany and had carried Hitler's signature on it or something.
Right.
Because when he showed it to the checkpoint, all the German soldiers stood to attention, saluted, and waved us through.
Wow.
Was he a Jedi?
Yeah.
Might as well been one. Well, actually, he was the gardener of this place.
Wow.
A humble person.
He must have done a really good job. Everyone saluted him.
So you,
gardener.
I mean, from what I've read, the deportation of Hungarian Jews to the death camps and labor camps and all that was one of, if not the most effective and efficient sort of deportation operations in the entire
yes
in the entire Reich, you know. So you were one. I mean, you know, you're the recipient of significant good fortune to have ended up where you ended up.
Yeah, but it's partly a group good fortune, because the deportations were intensive, as you say, and very efficient. In fact, a new platform was built in Auschwitz to receive them, and there was about 400,000 Jews, mostly from the countryside.
That's right, because the Germans were coming in from the outside.
Jews for later, and it was more problematic because it was more visible to the world. And there were various interventions by then, including even Pope, I think Pope Leo XII, no, Pius XII, who didn't have a good record actually but he intervened at one point with the Horthy. The Admiral Horthy was still in power then, and it sort of delayed until the actual takeover of power, which followed the day that I described when Horthy made this pronouncement. Immediately, the fascist party, the out-and-out fascist party, I should say, took over the Arrow Cross.
Right.
And the Arrow Cross was a political party, as well as, like the Brown Shirts, a series of gangs, of hooligans and armed gangs, which were hunting Jews from that day on.
Yeah.
And some terrible things were going on if you were found. But until then, as a group, the Budapest Jews were sort of in a waiting position. They had this preliminary stage, if you like, of having had to live in large yellow star-marked buildings, obviously, in order to make eventual deportation efficient and quick.
Yep.
but it never got to that point.
So I imagine when you're, I mean, I'm sure there's much more we could ask you about your own personal story, but the reason you're here, the occasion here, is that we're drawing parallels. We're drawing the parallels that I always grew up saying you should never draw. In fact, never compare the Holocaust to anything. It's this sacrosanct category of one incident, this anomaly in history that yet still somehow we're supposed to draw every lesson from, and the lessons are all about us. And at the same time, this morning I saw a photograph from Gaza of maybe 1,000, 2,000 Gazans crowded into a barbed wire fence area. This is taken from above, and the caption is, "This is an aid area. This is where they're lining up to get, a tiny amount of rations from private security contractors."
Yeah,
right. Well, talk about armed gangs.
Yes, that attack on UNRWA is just a completely false base story, and it's quite simply they are against UNRWA, partly to deny the refugee status of many Palestinians, but also in order to prevent effective food distribution. Quite simply, it's a tool of not quite clear ethnic cleansing and genocide,
and possibly to use food distribution and humanitarian aid distribution itself as a concentration tool to lure and So I'm wondering, with all of these both general and specific resemblances, what do you think of this argument that we shouldn't compare, we shouldn't draw these parallels, that it's dangerous?
I think it's Israel's self-serving taboo, which we should break as often as we can.
Yeah,
because it's a false, completely false claim that why can't you compare it when it is extremely comparable?
So nothing in your world is lost. Like the horrors that you and the Jews of Europe suffered in the 30s and 40s are not diminished by one iota by drawing whatever comparisons present themselves to what's going on now. You're not dishonored by that, or it doesn't whitewash anything to say, hey, look, we're living in a world where these crimes are still possible, and where in fact a so-called Jewish state can commit them.
Yes, and also just simply to be truthful. I mean, it is extremely like it. So why can't you say it? And there are many aspects that I found that where the current genocide in Gaza, particularly, rhymes with our experience. For example, the frequent dislocations on very short notice, just simply having to rely on information from your enemy, which we had to do as well, which connects to the Kastner project. I wondered sometimes, how could my father go into a deal and trust a deal with the Nazis? And the answer is that partly because of that there was no firm information, and the alternative was even worse.
Do you think the Nazis patted themselves on the back as much as Israel does for dropping leaflets?
Right, exactly.
Yes.
I made a joke on Twitter the other day when the Houthis warned Israel to vacate Ben Gurion Airport. Evacuate. I said, well, hey, they dropped a huge leaflet, right? No Zionist gets to complain.
Right. Yeah.
I'll give you another parallel which actually links to my family directly. That when there are these sudden orders to leave for another safe area, which turn out to turn out never to be safe.
Right.
What is it like for a family to suddenly get up and go? And what do you do if you have a disabled member? The pain of that decision, and it's got to be done in an instant, of whether to leave somebody behind because it's incapable of the journey, because there was no bus service for moving, or the whole family to stay in solidarity and help and expose themselves to the killings. Now, my family in Transylvania, because through my mother, I have a Transylvanian family connection who were farming in the middle of Transylvania, and
is that where modern day Slovakia would be?
No, Slovakia is a northern Carpathian.
Okay.
Transylvania is an area, a historic area of Hungary, which has been lobbed over to Romania after the First World War. Part of it, about half of it, returned by Hitler as a kind of payoff, a gift, in order for Hungary to participate in the Barbarossa attack on the Soviets. That
sort of like Israel giving back the Sinai.
Yeah.
Right, sure.
And, Admiral Horthy, as well as a war criminal, really, in allowing what was going on around the Jews, was also rather ineffective politician. He could have realized that this was not, in the long term, a very brilliant deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so after the Second World War, naturally, Transylvania went back to Romania.
Mm. Right.
But so you had family there.
Yeah, but when it was lobbed over to Hungary by Hitler, as gift of Hitler, immediately the Jews had a much worse prospect than when they were under a relatively more humane Romanian rule.
Mm.
And my family was approached by, who were farmers, on a quite a large scale. Some of them were Romanian workers, because the village was half Romanian, half Hungarian at that time.
Right.
Approached them and said, look, we are not very far from the Romanian border now, and we have secret tracks, and we can take the family by horse and cart illegally, dropping you on the Romanian border. You would be much safer. Don't trust the Hungarians. Don't stay. It's too dangerous for you. And they turned down this offer because there was one elderly family member who they judged couldn't take that arduous, bumpy journey. So they stayed. They never believed the full dangers that was in front of them. All of them were transported to Auschwitz, and just one teenager girl survived.
Wow.
15 died.
So you see a parallel between that, just the way in which people, the Israelis use this. Well, there's a safe zone here, and if you don't leave, then it's actually your fault. If you get killed. You see the parallel between those two things, and there was also a video. Go ahead.
Also, the parallel of the agony of dealing with a disabled person, if you happen to have one.
Yes, and I've seen a video recently of that in Palestine. Very heart-wrenching video of people moving their disabled or elderly family members, down an endless road filled with refugees. After their 5th or 6th displacement in the last 18 months. And it's awful to see this happening and simultaneously hear people excuse the deaths of anyone who has made the decision to stay because they just don't want to leave a family member behind, or they physically aren't unable to carry them on their backs.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that really
I
brings
mean,
home
it's
what you're saying.
heartbreaking.
Well, it brings home what you're saying about the deaths not being the ultimate, or the certainly the sole measure of a genocide, because while whatever percentage has been killed and a larger percentage has been injured and another percentage has been missing, the percentage of Palestinians in Gaza who are stressed beyond all human capacity 24 hours a day for 19 months and pressed into impossible, inhuman choices that would destroy the souls of most human beings to be in that position is close to it is 100%. And that's happening to, and that's what I take was happening to, not all Jews in Europe died, not all Jews, I mean, a large percentage did, not all Jews were in concentration camps, but all Jews were in a state of such extreme precarity and fear and terror so as to be marked by it for the rest of their lives if they did survive.
In fact, I think that there is a whole range of pains, which I call the sort of the invisible pain of the genocide that's going on. I'll give you an example of how it rhymes with my experience. That right after liberation, we were on the Buddha side of the town. As you know, Danube divides the town into Buddha and Pest. And our original home was on the Pest side. And after liberation, we had to wait a bit because all the bridges were blown up. And we had to wait for the Soviets to build a pontoon bridge so that we could walk over. There was no transport. Transportation hasn't started up yet. To look at what happened to our home. And we had no knowledge. And so we arrive at the place where our building was. And at a glance, we would take in the fact that we are homeless because the external walls were all down. And you could look into our building like it was a doll's house, with some of our furniture still there and so on. And at an instant, you realize you are homeless.
Right.
Now, the Gazans, after a bombing, coming up from the shelter, suddenly find no building above them. And at a glance, you are suddenly made completely homeless. And imagine the difficulty in Gaza of creating a home with all the restrictions of materials and permissions and God knows what else. And it may take a couple of decades to build up a home. And then it goes in an instant.
Yeah. On top of which, most of these people are already refugees.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, why are they there in the first place?
So what sort of experience is that to realize it all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Well,
right.
I mean, we were, by comparison, actually, in every comparison I can make, the Gazan situation is worse than what my direct and our family's direct experience was.
Right.
For example, it so happens that where our homes, protected, Swiss protected homes were, was close to the royal castle, where the climax of the fighting between the Germans and the Soviets played out. And, well, the destruction when we came up and looked around after the fighting was over was total in that small area. Not all Budapest was like that at all, but in that particular small area, because it was the final fight, it was total, just piles of rubbish and bricks and broken glass, mounds of it, and dead horses that soldiers discarded ammunition burnt on tanks, etc. That was the scene. But all of that was a byproduct of two armies fighting.
Right.
in Gaza, the same environment created deliberately, deliberate destruction.
Right.
So which is worse?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It's, you look at these scenes in Gaza of entire neighborhoods flattened, and when you compare it to pictures of destruction from other wars, people will make the
It's
argument,
never
well,
as
this is war, this is what it looks like. That's what it looks like when two armies are fighting each other. This is
and even
one
then it's not
army.
like that.
Yeah, and even then it's not an entire flattened, I mean the entire city, you'll see a city completely in rubble, and people act like it's just a natural byproduct of war, not realizing that they're talking about one army doing all of the destruction.
Yeah, I think, in fact, to apply the word war to what goes on in Gaza is incorrect.
Yes,
it's
agreed.
It's not a proper war at all.
Right. The Holocaust was a genocide couched in a much larger war. What's going on in Gaza is some skirmishes couched inside a genocide.
Right. It's like calling the Holocaust a war between the Germans and the Jews, as if there's two equally armed sides fighting each other.
Yes.
It's completely ridiculous.
Hold on there, Stephen. Don't mean to cut in. What you were saying was super interesting.
But we have other interesting things to talk about, like our sponsor, whoever the hell is going to be our sponsor. So please, everyone, stick around.
Whoever paid money to interrupt a Holocaust survivor.
That's right. Yes. It must be important if they interrupted. So please stick around. Listen to these ads. We will be right back. And we're back. This is Bad Hasbara, the world's most moral podcast. And now back to our interview with Stephen Kapos.
You got it this time.
Yes.
I want to ask you about where you're living now, which is, England. You've been there for many years. Something I've noticed about British Jews is a particular strain of paranoia, a particular strain of a feeling of insecurity, and a feeling of and British Zionists have this flavor to them. I guess it's similar to what I see in Canada too, a sense that despite what seems to be a very stable English existence, there's this conviction bred in the bone that what you went through, Stephen, is in the offing for them, in the next inning of the cricket match.
Right.
What do you think accounts for that?
Well, I think that's deliberately created, artificially created. I mean, it's taken sometimes to absurd ends. For example, when the Jeremy Corbyn project was alive, and I was a keen supporter, he has a record of being against any kind of discrimination, and had excellent relationship as a local MP with the Jewish community in his area and supporting them, etc. So nothing could be more unlike than Jeremy Corbyn as a danger to the Jewish community, and yet artificially, and as a kind of uniform chorus, the mass media and those behind them created, somehow stamped him with this kind of image of a greatest he called it, the chief rabbi said, existential danger to British Jews.
Right.
It's a cynical, deliberate, complete lie, and campaign, more than a single lie. It was a campaign to destroy him.
Yeah, our
And
former guest Asa Winstanley has written a book about that, and in the process, British Jews allow themselves to be weaponized in a war against wealth redistribution, against against a social welfare state, against any kind of future for social democracy in England. Like they become a tool of the ruling class. It's incredible to me.
Well, I think it's a particularly separate story of what happened to the mass media, which were able to create these campaigns against Jeremy Corbyn or in favor of Israel, and that there were no dissenting voices virtually, because of career consequences and so on.
People being worried about being smeared.
Yes, total intimidation and so on. Suddenly, when the United Nations a couple of days ago declared that 14,000 babies may be killed by starvation within the next couple of days, there was a panic. Suddenly, they woke up that past attitude may be coming home to roost, and they may be held responsible, which they should be.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course, that's when the rhetoric changed, not action, just the rhetoric.
Right. Which is, just the rhetoric seems to be as much as anyone can expect right now, unfortunately. It's interesting to me, to talk about the question of anti-Semitism with you specifically because you are a Holocaust survivor and you've seen firsthand what anti-Semitism is and what it can do. Not that others haven't experienced some types of anti-Semitism, but obviously this is, the most ultimate extreme example of a mass mega pogrom happening. And, as someone who is a Holocaust survivor, when you see, do you feel worried as a Jewish person in London? You talked earlier about people claiming, this march is a no-go zone. The phrase no-go zone is something I've only heard with regard to the UK. This is not something we have in the United States, where people go, oh, don't go there. That's a no-go zone. We don't even really, we don't talk about anything that way, but this seems to be something almost like a meme or whatnot within like UK Jewry, the idea of, a neighborhood in which Jews are not allowed because there are various, Muslims or Arabs or whatnot. What is your feeling about safety as a Jewish person in England?
It's not an issue, quite simply.
Yeah.
As yet, but I think generally, internationally, the conflation of being a Jew and supporting Israel as kind of naturally one and the same thing, which is what the Israeli state and Zionists generally propagate, will have inevitably a consequence of some kind of repercussion eventually, internationally. To what degree?
And then they can say, "We told you so." That's why you need us.
Right? I told you what happened. All we needed to do was convince everyone Jews support genocide for 2 years.
Come to Israel, the safest place for Jews.
Right.
I know.
This is the funny thing. I don't know if you get this from Israelis, or if Israelis just are smart enough to steer clear of you. But one of the funniest pushbacks I get, and Matt gets too, is Israelis being like, "Oh, you privileged, cushy, safe." They call me a safe Jew.
Right.
That's one of their pejoratives. Safe Jew sitting there sipping your Starbucks in Brooklyn, which is very insulting because I'd never go near a Starbucks. I drink much more expensive coffee than that. But with your safety and and I say to them, aren't you supposed to be the safe Jews? Wasn't that the whole? Isn't that the whole mission statement? Isn't that right on the company masthead? Like, isn't that the whole point of you? If you're not to save Jews, why do you even exist? Forget your right to exist. What's your reason to exist if you're not safe?
My late cousin, who put this very simply, said, well, if you have a people who are generally discriminated against and persecuted in all over the world, etc., the last thing you want to do is to collect them up and put them in one place as a target.
To concentrate them, as it
were.
Yeah.
But don't worry, these at this camp, all of the soldiers are on our side, which is, that's how they keep you safe. Like, what if you were friends with the German soldiers? In terms of your own... go ahead.
So, talking of which, being friends with the German soldiers, I must tell you this particular clear memory of the Second World War. That when the fighting reached us, so to speak, the front line, and just before the actual fighting, it was Christmas 1944. The German army invited us to share their Christmas do. All these Jews on false papers and we went, of course, couldn't decline it.
Right.
And so I remember that very clearly, that, the beautiful long white table set with little fir twigs and the Christmas tree at the end and a huge swastika flag hanging.
I'm sorry, I hate to keep bringing up Star Wars, but this is The Empire Strikes Back, right, Matt? When they show up on in Cloud City.
Right.
Darth Vader is hosting a big banquet.
Right.
Yeah. One Jew, one German soldier. Yeah.
Wow.
One Jew, one soldier, German soldier, one Jewish boy, one German soldier, all along.
Jesus.
And
what was the vibe? What was the spirit of?
Well, this is
spirit
interesting.
Of Christmas.
This is what I cannot quite understand. Is how is it that I don't remember what they served for food, but I do remember what the atmosphere was like, which was incredibly depressed.
Yeah.
Because they all knew that they are not going to see their own family. That's why they invited us.
Wow.
Because they were already totally surrounded by vastly superior Soviet forces. By that time, the Red Army was superior hugely in numbers, but also technologically. They had these multiple rocket firing Katyushas, which the Germans didn't have.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember them firing off at night. It was quite spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And they were not going to prevail. They knew that. So either they fall in a fight, or if they don't, it's a gulags, and where the survival rate was 10% for the German soldiers.
So they think at their moment of defeat, well, gather around, little Jews, to keep us company at least. Let's have a nice dinner together. Boy, we had some times together, huh?
Yeah. If they knew that we were Jews, but they didn't.
Right.
I mean,
they didn't. Right.
That's why the invitation. Now, again, this was a pretty scary situation. The biggest scare was one boy asking for the loo, and is taken by a German soldier, and then discovers that this must be a Jewish boy.
Oh no! Yeah. That is that. Yeah.
The adults in charge of us were aware of that, and they were really scared, but nothing happened.
I'd be scared if there were like Christmas songs where it's just like, oh shit, I did not learn any of these.
Heilige Nacht, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Heilige Nacht.
I want to ask you about your experience, speaking out as a Holocaust survivor, in solidarity with the Palestinians, speaking out against the genocide, speaking out against Israel. How long have you been doing it? How long have you been, voicing your opinion about this? And when did you start?
Well, really the start has to be back even before the Palestine question started up. When anti-Semitism was used as a weapon inside the Labour Party,
right?
And I was at that time. We are talking about the time when it all started up,
Right.
And Jeremy Corbyn was leader, but our local MP was Keir Starmer, and he was a shadow cabinet minister under Jeremy Corbyn, and this what we were convinced false anti-Semitism campaign started up, and I was a member of Momentum, which was organized for the support of Jeremy Corbyn, and we had a meeting prior to a big meeting of the Labour Party. We had a Momentum meeting the night before, where we were going to put a motion to the larger meeting, more general meeting, to say that we oppose this new move, that there is actually no serious anti-Semitism to speak about in our constituency, Holborn and St. Pancras.
Right.
And some others, colleagues, comrades, worded a good motion, and they looked around and said, well, who should present it? You are a Holocaust survivor, it best comes from you. I said, this is the first time I spoke publicly, actually.
Wow.
Because I accepted, well, how could I not? And the following day was the meeting, big meeting. And what I didn't realize, I had to follow the so-called leader of the council, who was a Zionist, speaking the opposite way. And then Keir Starmer speaking.
Wow.
He said, I just come from a shadow cabinet meeting, and after much debate, we have achieved unity that we must root out this dreadful anti-Semitism from the party, and we achieved this great unity. They badgered poor Jeremy Corbyn to kind of not to stop his descent, I suppose.
Keir Starmer had just had his meeting in the woods with the three witches who told him he would one day be prime minister. All he needed to do was to kneecap Jeremy Corbyn.
So I had to follow with a speech saying, well, I am pretty sensitized towards anti-Semitism as a Holocaust survivor.
Right.
And I haven't experienced any in our party, nor have I seen anybody else experience any. So I conclude there isn't any in our constitution.
Wow.
And
that's pretty simplistic there, Stephen. If you haven't experienced any and no one else has experienced any that you've spoken to and you haven't observed any, that therefore you conclude there isn't any. I mean, shouldn't you go looking?
Yeah. Have you searched on Twitter? Because I bet if you searched for words on Twitter, you could find some, and then you could experience it. Exactly. And then you would know what it's like to be persecuted for being Jewish.
Of course, we always accept that there is no 100% on anything.
Of course.
Right.
And the Labour Party would reflect the national average, but somewhat less than the national average of anti-Semites. But as I said, it didn't surface in our constituency in any visible way.
So you
and then we won the vote.
Ahead.
And we won the vote. It was
and you won the vote. Wow.
And we won the vote. This was the last time the left won a vote in our constituency.
Wow.
I knew Keir Starmer by then, and I went up to him afterwards and said, "Look, I'm sorry, Keir. I had to be honest to my experience." And he said, "Yes, but you divided the party." That's coming from him.
You divided the party. So it's interesting because it sounds like sort of the origin story of at least you speaking out publicly is seeing the way in which weaponized accusations of anti-Semitism are used for nefarious, means, right?
Yeah.
And with regard to Israel, I mean, it's kind of like it's the Jeremy Corbyn smear campaign on steroids. This is, they have entire organizations dedicated to doing, what they did to Jeremy Corbyn, but for anyone from a political leader to a college student.
It was probably incubated in the Labour Party and then made more general.
Well, certainly. I mean, but it's what's interesting, to me is the fact that the Israel, for especially people of, your generation, my parents' generation, has always the Hezbollah around it, or the, sort of propaganda about it has always been sort of like, this needs to exist for our safety. Was there ever a time where you felt that way, and then at some point, that changed? What changed?
Not me.
Coming out of the Holocaust, did you look at the creation of a Jewish state as some kind of salvation or vindication?
No. Well, as you probably know from your father as well, Central Europe's attitude to Zionism a bit different from some other countries, because in my experience in Hungary, the Zionists were regarded as a extremist, freakish little sect,
as they should.
and the password was assimilation. And this was in the Central European country, in the Austro-Hungary Empire, a deliberate policy of the Habsburgs to utilize the Jewish community and its energy and culture, etc., towards the capitalist transformation from feudalism.
Right.
And they saw them as an extremely useful vehicle. And they encouraged name changes so that they can more easily melt into the local population.
Right.
It came from above. And it was embraced very much. And that's my family changed names. And lots of others I know. And
ours did too, actually.
Yeah. And yes, I would recognize Mati as not a particularly Jewish name.
Yeah, the original name was Melzer.
Right. Yeah. Ours was Cohen from...
Yeah.
Apparently, my father and uncle, when they were young men, after the First World War, and under the influence of this kind of direction, they pulled out a map of Hungary and looked for a useful name. And they saw this little river, Caposh, and said, that will do.
Yeah. Well, it's one way to pick a name.
Yeah.
Sorry, but speaking of your name, I just to cut in here, and then I want to come back to the question of your your relationship to Zionism over the years, or where the speaking out for Palestine came from. But it is an unfortunate pun that your name, at least on paper, looks like one of the go-to slurs that Zionists love to throw around at people like the three of us. The implication being that we are like the Capos of the concentration camps, which is the Jews who got favors from the guards for ratting out their fellow Jews, or administering, or whatever. They were given a privileged position. Now, I've always, I want to just, obviously that's not your name, but just given that you're a survivor of this time, I take such offense at that, because what to me it evinces such a contempt for the victims. Why were those Jews in that position in the first place?
Right.
It would be like, calling someone some kind of slur for a prisoner who is put in a terrible position and has to make an impossible choice. What do you hear? What do you think when you hear that word being thrown around as a synonym for sympathizing with Palestinian human rights?
Well, I start answering that with what I heard from my father, who, as part of the Kasna project, was briefly incarcerated in Belzec, in a camp within a camp, because as part of the arrangements, although he didn't end up in Switzerland like previous Kasna transports did, the Germans, when they pulled the plug on the project, at least respected that it's somewhat different. They had a contract with these people, so they kept them in a inverted commas privileged enclosure within the camp. And he saw across the barbed wire what went on in the real camp.
Right.
And he said he actually seen completely dehumanized people, almost reduced to animal status, weakened and fighting over inedible soup, to be beaten to death by Capos. Actually saw it. So this created a very strong image in my mind about Capos and what that meant. And recently, I have been, in fact, insulted by Zionists who, in one of our local demos, mixed in with us. And when I was speaking, I was asked to speak at one point, this particular Zionist, wrapped in an Israeli flag, poised above me from a lamppost, kept shouting "Capo, Capo" at me while I was speaking. Now, I didn't hear it because I was speaking, but others did.
Right.
And reported him to the police who were present, because this is a rare occasion when, because of their special effort to provoke and intermingle, they came particularly early to occupy the area where we were licensed to be for the demonstration. So on this occasion, the police couldn't carry out their usual practice of separation. And some colleagues made an immediate complaint to the police, and the chap was arrested. And it is an ongoing case. A couple of weeks ago, we had 2 days in court where the prosecution was by the Crown. The defendant was this guy, and I was the victim, or one of the victims, because it wasn't only me he was saying this to, and our status was just as witnesses to this case, but it was between the Crown and this guy. And the judge, after the beginnings of the second day's hearing, dismissed the case. And on 2 grounds, a bit complicated to go into it, but on both grounds, when he pronounced it, the barrister representing the Crown said, the Crown disagrees. And it turns out that this particular judge, a junior judge, was completely wrong on law, and appeal is going on as we speak. It's in progress.
So he got off because he was claiming he was just saying your name, not that he was doing a slur?
That was laughed out. That he did say that, but that was not the ground.
He tried that defense.
He did, but
God.
But it had the weakness that even if you allow that my name was the same, which it isn't,
right? If
you pronounce it, how can he use it on others who have nothing like that name? Because it was on that occasion it was used wholesale, not only me.
Right.
So that completely undermined his case, and nobody took it seriously. But there were other technical grounds, and the interpretation of the actual meaning of the word capo. The judge said that it wasn't racist as a term. It was an extremely serious insult, which is protected under freedom of speech to pronounce. But at this point, the Crown said the Crown disagrees, because it turns out that if you read the law accurately and completely, then it is what is called racially aggravated accusation or insult. And that's sufficient. It doesn't have to be racist outright,
sure,
or anti-Semitic outright, although many experts claim it is anti-Semitic. I think it is too.
100% it's anti-Semitic. I mean, it's something that is been lobbed by Zionists and Israel supporters in general, whose cover for being allowed to do it is, well, I'm Jewish, so I'm allowed to do anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the entire argument for doing it, and for why it's not anti-Semitic. But just to finish out our conversation, talking about this, with you being a Holocaust survivor who is speaking out against Israel, speaking out against the genocide going on. I just, I want to hear about your experience with whether or not you had known as much vitriol existed in the Jewish state before October 7th, and how surprised have you been at just how, for lack of a better term, damaged the society is in Israel? And do you see that society as in any way rhyming with the society that you were, living in during the Holocaust?
And if not, is it redeemable?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a state, it isn't. I think it has to go. And it's become toxic completely. Israel become toxic, and Zionism become toxic, and it's not survivable what they have perpetrated so far, even so far, and it's not finished. If I compare the Holocaust experience, the big crime there, I think, of the population was indifference. The looking the other way, the giving into intimidation, not speaking up, which is a kind of guilt, serious guilt. After liberation, although there was a very brief period of democracy, which was an illusion of democracy, because underneath it, the Soviet occupying forces were there waiting to make and help a changeover into a dictatorial Stalinism, which occurred after the 3 years. But there was a 3-year period of democracy. There was immediate physical and violent retribution against the fascists. There were lots of trials and then hangings for a period, and then nothing. There was no education, no real confrontation. And during the communist regime, it was swept under the carpet completely. You probably know, Daniel, that even to pronounce the word Jewish in Stalinist Hungary was a crime, because that was racist.
Know that. I did
that
not
was
know
racist. That was racist. You could be arrested for that. And the result of that was complete suppression. They simply did not accept race identification whatsoever. It didn't go into your religion or race didn't go into any document in Stalinist Hungary.
To the point of short-term historical amnesia.
Exactly. It led to a lack of confrontation with the general public guilt that had to be because of the indifference to what went on.
Yeah.
An example, indifference and opportunism as well. One example of it was when my father was telling me that when they were transported in cattle wagons towards Belgium, and they stopped at a Hungarian village, and they were desperate for water. You could get a glass of water for a wedding ring.
Wow.
And that was not untypical of the kind of opportunism.
So indifference, opportunism, but what I'm not hearing you describe is bloodthirst, zealous, vengeful glee at the suffering, at the well-documented and live-streamed suffering of the Jewish people, because it wasn't live-streamed. It was done in the shadows.
Right.
And it was, but what we're seeing from Israeli society that Matt was pointing to, I think, are we right in thinking that we're seeing something
support?
New?
Yeah,
80% support. Yeah.
Yeah. The bloodlust, there was some during Holocaust, but it was restricted to the sort of hooligan gangs of the Arrow Cross, who were hunting Jews, quite simply.
Right.
And those horrific shooting into the Danube if you found one, and so on.
Well, actually, in Israel, it's also restricted to the hooligan gangs. It just happens to be that they are 80% of the population.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a big difference. Yes.
Yeah. The lunatic fringe is the majority of the country.
When you were young and you saw the the hatred of against Jews and whatnot, what did you process as their justification for it? Like the why do they hate us? Do you remember thinking, here is their argument for why this needs to happen?
Going back to the fact that not as it was going on, because I was just simply too young to analyze this kind of thing. But in retrospect, if you like, experienced the othering, the humiliation in retrospect, in realizing what went on to us or about us.
Right.
It's very complicated in Hungary because, again, Daniel, you probably know that the Stalinist regime, the Politburo, was almost uniformly Jewish. That wasn't helpful, and that fed a latent anti-Semitism in Hungary, and that burst its boundaries in the '56 uprising.
Yes,
that's right.
My father,
which is when my family left.
That's right.
Yeah, my father was director of a hygiene public health institute, and during the interval between the two Soviet attacks, when all kinds of political new parties cropped up, and suddenly new newspapers appeared, and there was kind of sense of great liberation, but also local workers' councils appeared everywhere at places of work. They weren't necessarily workers, though, who ran these places. In my father's institute, it was the old right-wing parties who monopolized these new councils, as they call them. They had a meeting in absence of my father, where they decided that it was time to have a Hungarian director.
Yeah.
So there you are.
Yeah. Well, the one of the reasons I ask about, the what these fanatics in Hungary who were, like you said, the ones who did have the bloodlust, these gangs, what their, stated justification is, one of the things that I see is a population in Israel in which they feel, you see the, bloodlust and celebration of the destruction of Palestinian people and the Palestinian, property and state, as completely justified, whether due to like religious reasons or for the most part due to this narrative that they in fact are the victims of the Palestinians.
Yes, I think they believe that. I think they genuinely believe probably that they would be, it's just a matter of time. There would be an attack by all the Arab countries, Palestinians, to obliterate them or something, and this is deliberately created, that feeling.
Yeah,
and it's also it's heightened by the fact that the longer you keep your boot on someone's neck, the more you fear what they're going to do when you loosen the pressure.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but my first shock about this kind of thing, this Zionist extremism, was when I first visited Israel, which was before the 67 fighting. And I found that branch of my family who either acted heroically during the Holocaust in Budapest or came back from Auschwitz, in the case of one particular cousin, they were all uniformly Zionists and racists. And it was a complete shock to me, and couldn't understand it, or how some people who experienced what they did could do it, could end up like that.
That is wild. I mean, especially, so you visited them. This is pre-67, and what was,
the racism was all in the air.
It was in the air. You could. It was just an anti-Arab
the militarism,
sentiment.
The militarism, and already,
right,
and this,
Well, I think one of the reasons we and so many people appreciate you and the work you're doing, and those like you, is that you're keeping that natural and healthy shock alive. That it shouldn't be the case that we go from. And I get tired of people saying, how could the Jews not learn the lessons of the Holocaust?
Right.
And I thought they were supposed to be the chosen people. Forget it. We're just like anybody else. We're capable of horrors. We're capable of great things. But your advocacy and the way you do what you do keeps alive a vision for us as Jewish people of it is simply not natural to go from victim to victimizer. It is not a vindication. It is not a happy ending. It is not the route to safety. It is not the route to security. And it cannot be the basis for nationhood or tribe or anything. And any Jewishness worth preserving has to be embodied by people like you who are standing up for universal values and principles and morality. So we thank you for your work, and we really appreciate you coming on the show today.
I thank you, but actually I feel it primarily as a duty, actually, because there are fewer and fewer survivors around who can still speak as well, and that's why I never turn down any invitation to speak anywhere, and which comes back to my experience with the Labour Party, where I accepted an invitation on Holocaust Memorial Day by Tony Greenstein's small socialist group, to speak, and they trailed it that I will be on the panel. And immediately I had a letter from the Labour Party bureaucrats that a couple of days before my event, that should I go ahead, I would be subject to a disciplinary investigation, which translated means thrown out of the Labour Party. So I didn't wait for that. And
Well,
And
we're
I
glad you
resigned.
no longer have a party to be thrown out of for appearing on the Bad Hasbara podcast.
That's right.
Because we'd like to think there would be repercussions. There should be
Yes,
repercussions for
yes.
coming on this podcast.
Yeah.
And we only feel a little less special to find out that you say yes to everybody.
No, I knew you said yes to everyone as soon as you were on this podcast. I was like, I know. But truly, thank you for coming on. And we feel very lucky to get to speak with you about
Well, thank you
this.
for having me. And
Yeah,
It's been an honor.
it's been an honor. Well, that was our interview with Stephen Kapos. We really appreciate him talking to us and appreciate all of you out there for listening to this very special episode of Bad Hasbara. Please email us badhasbara@gmail.com for all your questions, comments, concerns. Join the Patreon, patreon.com/badhasbara. All right, everyone. Thanks again so much for listening. And until next time, from the river to the sea.
Keeping it well hung all the way to Hungary.
Yup. Appropriate.
You're welcome, ancestors.
Jumping jacks was us. Push-ups was us. Krav Maga us. All karate us. Taking Molly us. Michael Jackson